The fog had settled over London like a secret no one dared speak aloud, thick, damp, and clinging to every gas lamp and cobblestone. It was the kind of evening where truth felt blurred, where time seemed to move slower, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Inside Whitehaven Mansions, however, all was order, until the letter arrived. I was lounging by the fire, the flickering glow casting shadows across my newspaper, when Mrs. Pearson entered with a slight frown and an envelope in her hand. A gentleman left this for Mr. Poirot. No name, no return address, just urgency. Poirot took it delicately, the way he handled every mystery, not with haste, but reverence. He turned it in his fingers, noting the texture, the scent, and then the seal. A deep, pressed wax stamp of a sapphire rose. "Aha," he whispered. "How curious." Inside was a brief, handwritten note. Its ink was fresh, the strokes nervous, yet elegant. "If you value truth, come to Box 12, Grand Tier, Royal Opera House. Tonight. Observe carefully. One among 5 wears the mask of a friend, but beneath is betrayal." I leaned over his shoulder. "Opera tickets delivered by ghost mail? Sounds like we're in for a romantic drama." But Poirot's expression had shifted, not excitement, not concern, but something else. "Non, Hastings. This is no theatrical whim. It is the scent of something real and rotten beneath silk." That evening, the Royal Opera House gleamed like a beacon through the fog. Inside, the foyer buzzed with the rustle of gowns and polished laughter, but Poirot's gaze never lingered on the glamour. His eyes were scanning, reading people like scripts. Mr. Reginald Blackwood met us at the entrance to Box 12. His face, though powdered for society's approval, betrayed weeks of sleepless worry. "Mr. Poirot," he whispered, "thank you for coming. My daughter, Cordelia, her future hangs by a thread." We took our seats as the overture began. Across from us, in Box 7, 5 young women entered in a flourish of silk and elegance, London's most admired debutantes. Cordelia Blackwood, regal and composed in midnight blue. Vivian Harrington, quieter, almost fragile, her dark hair framing a face too pale for the season. Rosalind Ashworth, all sharp angles and whispered wit. Penelope Montague, gentle, withdrawn, barely present. And Arabella Fairchild, poised like porcelain. To the untrained eye, they were the very picture of society's best, daughters of wealth, charm, and grace. But Poirot was not untrained. He leaned forward slightly. "Observe, Hastings, not how they smile, but who watches whom when they think no one sees." During the soprano's aria, Vivian's eyes flicked, not to the stage, but to Cordelia's bare neck, where a sapphire pendant had once hung. Then to the audience. Then to Colonel Pembroke, seated below, whose gaze remained fixed on Cordelia. Poirot murmured, almost to himself, "One does not steal for wealth. One steals for love, or vengeance." And then the curtain fell, and the first act was over. But in that moment, in the soft, layered silence between applause, I felt something else. Something cold, slithering beneath the velvet and perfume of the evening. This was no game of high society. This was war disguised as friendship. And somewhere among the 5, someone had already chosen to strike. The next morning rose gray and damp, the kind of London day that made every breath feel borrowed and every truth reluctant to rise. Yet inside our lodgings, Hercule Poirot was already fully dressed, his tie-pin glinting in the dull light as he sorted through a meticulous spread of newspaper clippings, notes, and invitations, a battlefield of facts. I entered with a yawn and a half-empty teacup. Honestly, Poirot, I expected at least one morning off from intrigue. He didn't look up. "Hastings, when the heart begins to lie, the clock of consequence ticks louder, and last night the ticking began in earnest." Before I could ask further, Mrs. Pearson arrived at the door, ushering in none other than Mr. Blackwood. He looked worse than the night before, his clothes perfectly tailored but crumpled, his face flushed with something between dread and desperation. "Mr. Poirot," he said, voice tight, "Colonel Pembroke came to see me this morning. Word of Cordelia's supposed involvement has reached his commanding officer. If her name is not cleared by weeks and the engagement is off." Poirot gestured for him to sit. Then we must move swiftly. Tell me, monsieur, every detail of these thefts. Blackwood exhaled, pulling a leather-bound notebook from his coat. It began 6 weeks ago. At Claridge's, a charity auction. All 5 girls were there, laughing, bidding, distracting. A string of black pearls vanished, one moment in the display case, the next gone. They searched everyone. Nothing. And then, 3 days later, the pearls reappeared, delivered anonymously to the charity, with a note. For the children. Poirot steepled his fingers. Ah, the dramatique flourish. Then, Blackwood continued, 2 weeks later at Asper's, they were shopping for Penelope's wedding bracelet. A Georgian diamond piece disappeared from the tray. It reappeared in the poor box at St. George's, wrapped in blue silk. And the third? Poirot asked without missing a beat. A ruby pendant, Blackwood said quietly. Lady Peton's, taken during a private viewing. Returned days later by a street sweeper who claimed to find it in an alley. I frowned. But why return them? What sort of thief gives back the loot? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The kind who wishes to destroy not with loss, but with suspicion. Not theft, but implication. And tell me, monsieur, in all 3 instances, was your daughter nearby the missing items? Blackwood hesitated. Yes, but so were the others. Of course, Poirot said softly. But Cordelia is the brightest star, the most visible. And envy, monsieur, it thrives in shadows. I leaned forward, my curiosity now fully piqued. You believe she's being framed? Poirot nodded. A campaign designed not for gain, but disgrace. There was a long silence. Blackwood looked down at his hands. You think one of the other girls? I think, Poirot interrupted gently, that only one of them knows how to steal in such a way that it appears both elegant and invisible. Blackwood exhaled. There's to be a soirée tonight. At our residence. The Duchess of Marlborough is bringing her sapphire tiara. Cordelia will be there. So will the other 4. Poirot smiled, a slow and measured thing. Then we shall be there too, monsieur. Quiet observers. For where temptation arises, truth tends to follow. As Blackwood left, the door clicked softly behind him. I turned to my friend. Poirot, do you truly think someone would risk it all, friendship, reputation, love, just to bring Cordelia down? Poirot looked out the window, where the fog had begun to thin. Hastings, he said quietly, people will do unspeakable things when their hearts are full of love unreturned or love betrayed, especially when that love wears another's name. And outside, beneath the rain-dark sky, the streets of London waited, whispering secrets in puddles and smoke, while behind velvet doors, someone was already preparing their next move. The Blackwood residence in Belgravia shimmered like a polished jewel beneath the night sky. Golden light spilling from the windows, laughter floating into the winter air, and carriages arriving in elegant procession. Yet beneath the sparkle and silk, there was something tighter in the air than corset strings, a sense that every glance tonight might conceal something sharp. As Poirot and I arrived, the butler bowed stiffly and led us through the grand foyer, where portraits of long-dead ancestors peered down from shadowed frames. The drawing-room was a study in luxury, crimson drapes, soft candlelight, and the soft hum of a string quartet drifting from the gallery. Guests milled about, sipping champagne and trading practiced compliments, but my eyes were drawn at once to the 5 young women gathered near the fireplace. Cordelia Blackwood stood at the center of the group, like the calm in a storm, dressed in a deep garnet gown that made her hair gleam like copper under firelight. She smiled with practiced ease, though I noticed her fingers occasionally brushed her bare neck, where the family sapphire pendant had once rested. Beside her stood Vivian Harrington, draped in silver lace, her expression as poised as porcelain. Yet her eyes, as ever, were elsewhere, not on the company, not on her wine, but on Cordelia, and not with admiration, with hunger. Rosalind Ashworth, sharp-featured and full of mischief, leaned in toward Penelope Monteague, whose pale blue gown was as soft as her voice, her head ducked like a girl trying to make herself small. Arabella Fairchild, graceful, distant, hovered like moonlight, always on the edge of the group, her eyes impossible to read. Mr. Blackwood approached us with quiet relief. "The Duchess will unveil the tiara shortly," he murmured. "It's the perfect bait, wouldn't you say?" Poirot offered a small nod. "Indeed. Let us watch. But say nothing, monsieur. We must allow the fox to believe the henhouse unguarded." Soon the guests were ushered into the salon, where the Duchess of Marlborough stood near a velvet-lined case. The sapphire tiara, a gleaming crown of deep oceanic stones, sat displayed atop silk like a relic in a chapel. Its central gem alone was worth a small estate. The room buzzed with awe. I caught sight of Cordelia, smiling politely as the Duchess spoke, but her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Vivian stood beside her, too close, her eyes never leaving the tiara. Poirot nudged me gently. "Look, Hastings. Mademoiselle Harrington. She watches not with admiration, but calculation. And observe Miss Penelope. How she wilts when Vivian stands near." I leaned closer. "You think Vivian is manipulating them?" "I think," Poirot whispered, "that we are witnessing a performance. But the role of villain is not played with anger. It is played with silence, with trust." After the unveiling, guests returned to their conversations. Glasses clinked. Laughter swelled. The young women drifted apart briefly, moving among the guests like petals on water. It was then that Poirot moved. He followed the footman who had been assigned to guard the tiara, a young man with nervous hands and a face that had seen little of aristocracy. Poirot exchanged only a few words with him, then returned to my side with a curious glint in his eye. "The tiara," he murmured, "has not been tampered with. Yet. But the footman, he was slipped something earlier. A powder, mixed into his cordial." "Sleeping powder?" I asked. Poirot gave a small shrug. "Perhaps. Or something slower. Either way, someone planned to remove the guard." "Vivian. She did not deliver the drink," he said, "but she arranged for the footman to be reassigned to the tiara tonight. That is a detail few would know." Just then, a quiet gasp spread through the salon. The footman had collapsed, his tray clattering to the floor. People rushed to help. The Duchess cried out, and when the dust settled, the tiara was gone. But Poirot did not move. He folded his arms calmly. "Hastings," he said softly, "do you recall the sapphire pendant Cordelia once wore?" "Of course. It vanished weeks ago," he said, "and yet someone wore a replica of it tonight." My eyes went wide. "Vivian." "Oui," he said, "but not on her neck. It was hidden in her glove, a faint outline, barely visible. She brought it tonight, not to flaunt, but to plant." As murmurs rose and the chaos swelled, Poirot stepped forward. "Mesdames et messieurs," he called, voice rising above the confusion. "There is no need for panic. The tiara has not left the room." And with that, he looked directly at Vivian, whose hands had begun to tremble. "We are not searching for a thief," he said. "We are unmasking a betrayal." A silence fell across the drawing room, like a theater curtain mid-performance, breathless, poised, waiting for the next line. All eyes turned to Poirot as his words settled like frost. "We are not searching for a thief. We are unmasking a betrayal." Vivian Harrington stood perfectly still, her silver gown catching the light like ice, her expression carefully carved. But her hands, those betrayed her. They trembled just enough for Poirot to notice. Lady Cordelia Blackwood looked from Poirot to Vivian, confusion and hurt blooming across her features. "Vivian? That's absurd," she said, though the certainty in her voice faltered. Vivian finally spoke, her voice measured but tight. "Monsieur Poirot, you've made a dramatic accusation. If you've any evidence to support it, I suggest you produce it." Poirot bowed slightly. "But of course, we are civilized, are we not?" His eyes turned to the footman, now seated with a cool compress to his head. "You were offered a cordial tonight, by one of the ladies, we?" The footman blinked, confused. "Yes, just before the unveiling. A young lady in green, I think." Vivian stiffened. Her gown, while silver, had a greenish sheen under candlelight. It was enough. Poirot moved closer. "You selected the tiara as guard yourself, no? Told the staff earlier this afternoon that he was the most reliable face in the house. Quite clever. Then, once he was in place, You ensured he'd not stay conscious long enough to guard anything. Vivian's jaw clenched. You're grasping at shadows. That proves nothing. Ah, but I am excellent at grasping shadows, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, for they often carry truth. He turned to the Duchess. May I? She hesitated, then gave a nod. Poirot walked over to the pedestal, where the tiara had been. Carefully, he removed the velvet cover. Beneath it, not the tiara, but a crumpled handkerchief. Poirot lifted it, turning it to reveal a faint trace of blue powder. This, he said, is theatrical dust, used to mimic precious gems under stage lighting. Not real sapphires. A distraction. Rosalind gasped. Then the tiara was swapped. Oui, Poirot confirmed. Moments before the unveiling. A false version placed beneath the cloth, just long enough for the crowd's attention to be misled. He glanced to Vivian. The real tiara, mademoiselle, where did you hide it? In the music room? In a guest's coat? Or perhaps on your person? Vivian's voice turned sharp. I demand to be searched by someone appropriate. Poirot inclined his head. That will not be necessary, because the tiara is not on you now. You are too clever to carry it yourself. Instead, I believe you passed it to someone else, someone whose hands are not under suspicion. Arabella Fairchild. Arabella blinked, startled. I don't know what you mean. Poirot's tone softened. Mademoiselle, you have always stood apart from the others, no? Always the listener, the confidant. You were drawn into something by loyalty, or guilt. I do not think you are the thief, but I believe you were made a vessel. Tears welled in Arabella's eyes. She said it would be returned tomorrow, that it was just to make a point, to show Cordelia how fragile her perfect world is. The room fell into stunned silence. Vivian stepped back, cornered now, yet unrepentant. She has everything, she whispered. Cordelia. The looks, the love, the future. She never had to work for it. She never bled for it. I did. Cordelia's voice cracked. Vivian, I trusted you. Vivian laughed once, bitterly. That was your first mistake. Poirot stepped between them gently. No, mademoiselle. Her first mistake was assuming love makes one blind. But love, when true, sees with more clarity than envy ever can. The police were called. Arabella, shaken, led them to the cloakroom, where the tiara had been tucked inside the lining of a fur muff. Vivian was taken aside, her fate uncertain, though Poirot assured the officers she was more desperate than dangerous, a soul twisted by comparison, not cruelty. Later that evening, in the quiet aftermath, Poirot and I sat near the fireplace, once more. Cordelia and Colonel Pembroke stood across the room, quiet but together. Rosalind and Penelope sat close by, shaken but intact. The fire crackled. You saw it all so clearly, I said to Poirot. He sipped his tisane. Because jealousy, mon ami, is a silent performance, but it cannot resist the stage. The morning after the soirée broke cold and silent, with snow softening the grounds of the Blackwood estate. Yet inside, unease stirred. Poirot stood at the window, his gaze fixed beyond the frost. She confessed too easily, Hastings, he said. It felt rehearsed. I nodded, still unsure. You think Vivian wasn't working alone? Before he could answer, Mr. Blackwood arrived, pale and breathless. Monsieur Poirot, Cordelia received this. He handed Poirot an unsigned letter, its ink still fresh. You were never the true target. Ask her about the orchard. We followed Cordelia to the old orchard, long abandoned, its trees bare and brittle. There, beneath one twisted trunk, Poirot uncovered a rusted music box, Cordelia's from childhood. Inside it, a faded photo, Cordelia as a child, seated beside another girl, unmistakably a young Vivian Harrington. She knew me, Cordelia whispered, stunned. Even back then. Poirot nodded. She was once part of this family, hidden, fostered, forgotten. You were raised in the light. She grew up in the shadows. Back at the house, Poirot uncovered old records confirming the truth. Vivian had lived at the estate briefly as a child, her identity buried beneath vague documents and polite silence. She didn't want revenge, Poirot said quietly. She wanted to be remembered. Later, when Poirot met Vivian in custody. Her voice was steady. "I never wanted to hurt her," she said, "just to remind her I existed." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "And now she will never forget." Snow fell steadily outside as the truth settled, bitter, but finally exposed. The snowfall had thickened by morning, muffling the world in a cold hush. Inside the drawing room, the fire crackled gently, yet the air remained heavy with what had been uncovered the night before. Cordelia sat near the hearth, silent, the letter still folded in her lap. Her expression had changed, not with fear, but something deeper, grief sharpened by betrayal. Poirot stood across from her, arms gently crossed. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "are you ready to remember everything?" She nodded. "If it means understanding why this happened, then yes." He led her and me to the east wing of the house. It had been locked for years, preserved like a museum of another time. Cordelia hesitated as the door creaked open. The corridor was dim, lined with faded portraits. At the end was a room we hadn't seen before, once a nursery, now coated in dust. And on one wall, a large oval mirror, cracked slightly down the center. Poirot stepped forward and gently brushed the mirror's frame. "You played here as a child," he said, "and so did she." Cordelia frowned. "Vivian." Poirot nodded. "You were inseparable, until one day she vanished. The adults called it a relocation. You called it forgetting. But the mirror never did." Cordelia moved closer. For a moment, her reflection aligned with something else, faint, like a second figure just behind her. She gasped softly, eyes wide. "I remember now, we used to sit right there. She called me sister." Poirot turned to her. She meant it. Later, in the archives, we found the last piece of truth, an unsent letter from Lady Blackwood, dated years ago, addressed to a solicitor. It confirmed Vivian's parentage, a distant cousin, taken in quietly, then sent away when whispers began to circle. The estate's reputation had been deemed more important than the child it cast out. Cordelia read the letter with trembling hands. All this time, she only wanted me to know. Poirot said gently, "Vivian wasn't driven by envy, but by abandonment. The thefts, the whispers, all were echoes of a life erased." The pieces were falling into place. The mystery, it turned out, was not about jewels, but belonging, about a girl who tried everything to be seen, and another who was only now learning to look. That night, as the snow continued to fall, the mirror in the nursery was taken down, not to be hidden, but to be replaced with a portrait of two girls, side by side. The past, finally remembered. The days that followed were marked by a strange quietness, as though the house itself was exhaling after years of held breath. Yet for Poirot, the puzzle was not fully resolved. There were still missing pieces, motives that felt blurred, and moments that didn't align. He spent his hours not in rest, but in solitude, poring over letters, staff logs, and guest records with the meticulous care of a man who refused to leave a single thread loose. One morning, Poirot asked Cordelia and Mr. Blackwood to join us in the conservatory. The snow outside had eased, casting long white light through the glass ceiling. Poirot stood beside a small phonograph he had requested be brought in. "What I am about to play," he said, "was recovered from a storage room by one of your footmen. It dates back nearly a decade, a forgotten recording, perhaps, until now." He set the needle, and a crackling voice filled the room. It was faint, but unmistakably young, a girl singing a lullaby, off-key and breathless with laughter. Then, a second voice entered, quieter, more hesitant. "You always sing better than me, Cordelia." Cordelia paled. That was Vivian." Poirot paused the phonograph. A child's voice buried in dust. "What does it reveal, mon ami? That even then, she saw you as family. But more importantly, listen to what comes next." He dropped the needle again. More static, then another voice, older, firm, cold. "Stop that nonsense. We've had quite enough confusion about who belongs where." Cordelia blinked. "That was my mother." Poirot nodded solemnly. Vivian was not sent away merely out of necessity. She was silenced, told to forget, told she had no place. Mr. Blackwood looked stunned. She must have kept the recording all these years. No, Poirot corrected softly. She returned for it. She snuck in, not to steal diamonds, but to steal memories, her own. Cordelia lowered her gaze. I thought the thefts were just mischief, but she was trying to leave breadcrumbs. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. And she succeeded. The law may call her guilty, but you must ask yourselves of what? Of larceny, yes, but also of longing, of being denied her name, her home, her story. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was the silence of revelation, heavy, painful, necessary. That night, Cordelia asked to visit Vivian in custody. Poirot did not accompany her. Some wounds, he said, must be dressed by the very hand that helped make them. When she returned, her face was drawn but calm. She won't say much, she told us, but I said everything I needed to. Poirot offered her a rare, gentle smile. Then justice, mademoiselle, is already halfway done. The following morning arrived in hushed tones, the snowfall having slowed to a whisper. Outside, the gardens of the Blackwood estate lay blanketed in white, their statues and fountains half sunken beneath the weight of the season. But inside, change had begun. Poirot, ever elegant and deliberate, was seated by the drawing-room window, his gaze distant, as if watching not the snow, but time itself. It is curious, Hastings, he said softly, how the truth, once unburied, does not merely reveal, it redefines. Cordelia joined us moments later, her steps more grounded than they had been in days. She wore no jewels now, no ornament, save for a simple pendant, one she had not worn since childhood. I've asked the inspector, she said, if Vivian might serve her sentence in a sanatorium rather than prison. He's agreed to consider it. Poirot inclined his head. Compassion, mademoiselle. A fine adornment for any name. Meanwhile, the staff, once stiff with suspicion, now moved more freely through the halls. The estate felt less like a stage and more like a home. And yet, as Poirot reminded us, some mysteries still stirred beneath the surface. Later that afternoon, he requested that we revisit Cordelia's personal study, the place where the original accusations had begun, the sapphire necklace, the misplaced glove, the supposed clues that had once pointed toward guilt. Poirot studied the space carefully, this time not as a detective, but as a philosopher of the human heart. You see, Hastings, he explained, the thefts were not merely about objects. They were performances, choreographed scenes meant to implicate Cordelia. Yes, but more than that, to orchestrate her downfall with subtlety and restraint. Only someone who knew her intimately could strike with such precision. He turned to Cordelia. Vivian loved you in her own fractured, buried way, and that made her the perfect illusionist. She knew your gestures, your words, the details of your life too well. So she became your reflection, and then distorted it. Cordelia stood silently by the bookshelf, her hand resting on the edge of a framed childhood photo. I keep wondering, she said, if I ever truly knew her, or if I was so sheltered in admiration and privilege, I simply never looked. Poirot nodded. Ah, but now you are looking. That, mademoiselle, is what redeems us. As dusk fell, the three of us stood on the manor's front steps. A fresh layer of snow began to dust the stones, and for the first time in days, the sky broke open, pale golden light streaming faintly through thinning clouds. It is not often, Poirot said, that a case leaves behind no villains, only wounded hearts. He paused, his breath forming delicate clouds in the air. But perhaps, he added, wounds can heal if truth is allowed to breathe. The manor bell chimed softly behind us, not as a warning, but as a final note, one that marked not an ending, but the slow beginning of peace. And in that moment, beneath the winter light, it felt as though something lost had quietly, patiently, come home. The cold that morning was not the biting kind of days past. It was gentler, tempered, as though the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. A faint sun spilled across the Blackwood estate, glinting off frost-laced windows and settling into long-forgotten corners of the house. Yet despite the newfound calm, Poirot remained restless. There was one final question gnawing at the edges of his otherwise neat conclusion. And that question, as always, had less to do with evidence and more to do with the human heart. In the drawing room, Poirot stood before the grand fireplace, staring into the embers as if reading a second, more private case only he could see. "Names, Hastings," he said suddenly. "They are more than titles. They are inheritances, shields, and sometimes cages." I nodded, unsure of what prompted the thought. But as always, he was already steps ahead. "We must visit Miss Harrington again," he said, reaching for his coat. "Not as accuser, as listener." At the town constabulary, Vivian Harrington sat in a plain room, her posture composed but hollow. She looked older somehow, not in years, but in resignation. When Poirot entered, she met his eyes with a flicker of defiance, then defeat. "You've come to lecture me," she said coolly. "No, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, taking the seat across from her. "I have come to understand what remains." Vivian's lips parted, but no words came at first. Her eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, flicked to the small window in the corner of the room. Then finally she spoke, quiet, raw. "Do you know what it's like to grow up in someone's shadow, Monsieur Poirot? To be told you are the pale echo of someone else's brilliance? To wear their old dresses, to hear your father toast them at every dinner, to have the world look at you and see her, but faded?" Poirot did not interrupt. He only listened. "She was loved," Vivian continued. "Cordelia. Always loved. She had that effortless grace, that beauty, that ease. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't, because she was kind, even to me, especially to me. And that made it worse, because it made me believe, for a while, that I mattered too." Her voice cracked then, the veneer fracturing. "When Colonel Pembroke proposed, it was like something inside me shattered. I told myself I didn't care, but I did. I envied her happiness, her certainty, her name, and so I took pieces of it, not to ruin her, to see if I could become her." Silence stretched between them. Poirot finally spoke, gently. "You did not want her to fall. You wanted to rise." Vivian looked away, ashamed. "It's too late now." "No," Poirot said. "It is only late, but not beyond repair." When we returned to the estate, Cordelia was waiting in the conservatory. Poirot shared everything Vivian had said, not to excuse her actions, but to offer her pain a voice. Cordelia listened without interruption. At the end, she closed her eyes and nodded. "She's still my friend," she whispered. "Even now." Poirot placed a hand over hers. "Then you, mademoiselle, have chosen not revenge, but remembrance. And that is the beginning of healing." That evening, as the house filled once more with a quiet hum of activity, guests departing, staff restoring the home to order, Poirot stood by the window and watched the sky darken. "Hastings," he said, "this case was not about theft. It was about longing. Not for jewels, but for identity, for acknowledgement, for light." I stood beside him, watching the stars begin to pierce the sky. "And did we bring that light?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "No, mon ami. They did, the ones brave enough to speak, and brave enough to listen." And in that moment I understood. Truth does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, not as a verdict, but as a name, finally spoken without fear. Evening fell softly over the Blackwood estate, not with the weight of dread that once cloaked its corridors, but with a quiet, earned serenity. Inside the drawing room, the fire crackled warmly, not in menace, but in welcome. The shadows, once heavy with secrets, now danced lightly on the walls, as if grateful to finally breathe. The mystery was solved. The truth, though painful, had come to light. And yet, as I sat with Hercule Poirot near the hearth, a final stillness seemed to settle over the space. Not silence, but a kind of reflection. Poirot held a cup of tea in his delicate fingers, staring into the flames, as if reviewing the entire affair in reverse. "You see, Hastings," he said at last, "this was not a story of villains. It was a tragedy of silence. When words are withheld, when feelings are locked away, they ferment, and then they explode." I nodded, glancing toward the tall windows, where Cordelia and Colonel Pembroke now walked arm in arm across the snow-dusted terrace, their voices low, their laughter soft. It still amazes me, I said, how close they came to being torn apart, how easily perception can become punishment. Poirot set down his cup. Because perception, mon ami, is louder than reason. The whisper of doubt, especially when it comes from those closest to us, is a poison. And yet, Cordelia, she held to her dignity. She trusted the truth would speak, even when she could not defend herself. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the flames lean and curl. Then Mr. Blackwood entered, no longer burdened by the pallor of disgrace, but lighter somehow. He approached Poirot, pausing by the fire. "I've written to the judge personally," he said. "Requested leniency on Vivian's behalf. My daughter, she would have it no other way." Poirot inclined his head. "Then you have done rightly, monsieur. It is a rare thing, to suffer injury and still choose grace." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Your presence here, it saved more than just Cordelia's name. It saved our family from turning to bitterness." Poirot waved the compliment away, ever modest. "I only illuminated what was already present. The love, the pain, the longing, they were always there. I merely helped arrange the pieces." As the evening deepened and the last of the guests bid their farewells, Cordelia returned inside and approached us. Her eyes held both exhaustion and peace. "Will you stay one more night?" she asked gently. Poirot smiled. "Alas, mademoiselle, duty calls. But your home, it is no longer haunted, not by suspicion, nor by silence." She extended her hand, and he took it with quiet reverence. Later, as we boarded our carriage and began the slow departure down the snow-covered lane, I turned to him. "You were right about the human heart, old friend. It is a stage." Poirot nodded. "And on that stage, the actors wear many masks. But truth waits behind the curtain always." Outside, the manor's lights glowed in warm golden squares, flickering faintly through the snow. Somewhere inside, laughter rang faintly. Somewhere else, a letter was being written, not of accusation, but of apology. And as the estate faded into the distance, I looked back one final time. A single lantern still burned by the doorway. A symbol, perhaps, that even in the aftermath of betrayal and heartbreak, hope had chosen to stay. For the heart, though fragile, remembers not only pain, but the courage it took to heal.